everybody, welcome to Penn State Sports Night. I'm Zach Kaplan.
And I'm Tom Johnston.
We begin with Penn State hockey, the Big Ten men's hockey tournament getting underway this weekend with a new format this year. Last year, all the games up at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit. This year, some home and home series. It's a best-of-3 series for the higher seeds in the Big Ten as Penn State. They swept Minnesota last weekend for the right to host the Golden Gophers at Pagula Ice Arena this weekend. Penn State, the 4 seed, Minnesota, the 5 seed, Notre Dame, the top seed, their first year in the Big Ten, so they get a first-round bye. Meanwhile, the 2nd seed, Ohio State Buckeyes, will host the 7th seed, Michigan State Spartans, and the 3rd seed, Michigan Wolverines, will host the 6th seed, Wisconsin Badgers. The teams will play best-of-3 this weekend, and then the lowest seed left will play at Notre Dame next weekend, while the other two will face off against each other.
Penn State Wrestling will head to East Lansing, Michigan this weekend for the Big Ten Wrestling Tournament. Penn State puts 9 ranked wrestlers in the tournament, featuring Bo Nickel at 184, Jason Ulf at 157, and Zane Rutherford at 149. Vincenzo Joseph is number 1 in the RPI and tied 3rd in the coaches pool at 165.
And in Penn State basketball, the Big Ten tournament starting up this week at Madison Square Garden. 2nd-ranked Michigan State, 2nd-ranked in the country, that is, the regular season Big Ten champion. They were 16-2 in Big Ten play and 28-3 overall. Penn State finished as the number 7 seed with a 9-9 record in conference and 19-12 record overall. That was Pat Chambers' highest mark at Penn State. They will play 10 seed Northwestern at 6:30 on Wednesday in the opening game. They will play the Ohio State Buckeyes in the quarterfinals on Thursday at 6:30 if they win their opening game. In other news, Pat Chambers this past week denied any connection to the ASM Sports Agency after it was revealed DJ Newbill, a former Penn State player who played from 2012 to 2015, was a former player of Chambers. He was named in the Yahoo Sports story, a story that named 25 current and former Division I players, and while detailing ASM Sports and their possible role in the corruption of college basketball. And now, let's send it to Jeremy, Hunter, and Jason, who will be talking the NFL Combine.
Welcome back to Penn State Sports Night. I am alongside Jason Marcus and Hunter Pitkoff. The Super Bowl is old news at this point, as draft season is the real main event marked on the football calendar. The NFL Scouting Combine will be held this week, where college football's elite talent will be showcasing their worth in front of all 32 teams. So now, Hunter, I want to start with the quarterbacks. Which of those top-tier prospects can separate themselves from the pack? Because they're all pretty close together right now.
Yeah, you're definitely right. I'm thinking the Heisman winner this year, Baker Mayfield. And yes, although he's not that tall, maybe just an above-average athlete, but what he needs to do at the Combine, the most important thing, is go into those meetings and show teams that he's moved past the on and off field antics, show that he's a leader. His mind is 100% in the right place. All he wants to do is win and play football games. And also, in terms of on-field production, his passer rating was 198.9 last year, completed 70.5% of his passes. That's amongst the greatest to ever do it in college football. So I definitely think that when it comes to the passing drills, he's going to be insanely accurate. He's going to look so composed in the pocket. And I think that the way that he's going to conduct himself there, both in the interviews and on the field, he thrives when there's pressure on him and the lights are the brightest. I think not only right now he's a top 10 prospect, but I think that he could possibly give the Cleveland Browns some consideration to take him with the first pick.
Now, as you said, there's definitely no doubt that he has the ability to do it on the field, but what I'm curious about is there are some Johnny Manziel comparisons being made with him and Baker. Do you think those are legitimate concerns, or is he going to be able to prove to teams in the interviews that that comparison's not legitimate?
Yeah, well, Johnny Football and Baker Mayfield, what they had in common is that they both were able to make, crazy plays, both with their legs, both in the pocket. But the difference in terms of attitude is that Johnny Manziel's mind just wasn't in the right place. He had a little bit of an alcohol problem. He was going through some mental problems. It doesn't seem like Baker Mayfield's like that. It seems like he's 100% all in on playing football games. So I think that Baker Mayfield's going to be fine.
Okay, and now, Jason, we're going to move on to some Penn State players here. First of all, Mike Gesicki of that tight end group, a very talented group of tight ends this year. He's currently a day 2 prospect. What do you think he can do to move up the draft board?
Well, I think the big thing with Mike Gesicki that you have to take in consideration is his size. He's 6'6", about 250 pounds. So that's actually optimal for tight ends now in the NFL. You look at players like Jimmy Graham and Rob Gronkowski, and they're massive red zone targets, and that's why they've had so much success. So from that perspective, Gesicki, I believe, can go right into the NFL and be a successful player. But the big knock on him right now is his blocking ability. It's not that great. A lot of teams are kind of concerned about it. They actually read somewhere that one analyst believed that he was a liability and you might as well not even put him out there. So he's definitely got that to prove. Unfortunately for Mike, there's not really drills at the combine that are specifically able to show your blocking ability. That's kind of the skill that you need to prove in game. So I don't know how much his draft stock is going to improve based on his performance in the combine, but I do know that if he gives it his all and he does well, it's not going to hurt him. So I would still say he probably goes in the second round.
I think it's worthy to note also that a recent trend in the NFL is that you have a lot more H-back tight ends who are basically just pass catchers and they kind of don't have that run blocking skill set. Mike Gesicki might be that kind of player, so I think he can still thrive in the NFL in that kind of a role.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you see a lot more teams now focusing on the tight end. For a couple of years, it was definitely like a lost position, like they didn't have much value. But I definitely see him going to a team that already has their solidified blocking tight end and just needs someone with a big frame to go up and catch the balls in the end zone, and I think that's where he'll fit perfectly. So look him to see to go one of those teams.
Okay, so now we are going to move on to the wide receiver position, and we're going to talk about another Penn State player here. Mm-hmm. So we got Deshaun Hamilton. He's a very interesting wide receiver prospect, and he's had a great Penn State career. And now, after an impressive Senior Bowl, what do you think he can do to wow scouts some more?
Well, I think the one thing that Deshaun Hamilton has working against him is a lot of scouts don't believe that he has the top tier speed to be successful in the NFL. But the one thing, he has got a lot going for him as well. For example, one of the things that when you talk to scouts about Deshaun Hamilton, the first thing they mention is his character. He's probably got, as far as like off the field issues, you're not going to have any with Deshaun Hamilton. He's a top-notch human being, very selfless, very compassionate. So I think he has that going for him. Not to mention that he's a very crisp route runner, which we see in the NFL now that's kind of an underrated skill. I look at the guy like Antonio Brown, who maybe not be the fastest guy in the league, but he runs a route better than anyone, and that's why he's the best. So Deshaun Hamilton has that going for him, and another advantage that he has is based on his size, he's only about 6'1", so he's not the biggest guy in the room, so he's going to be playing more of a slot type role at the next level. But that works to his advantage because even as a slot wide receiver, he's got the size that's bigger than most. A lot of times you're seeing slot wide receivers, they're like 5'10", Austin, who can just burn you down the field, but they're not that big. Deshaun's kind of the opposite. He's a little bit bigger than a slot, but he just may not have the speed, but he's a good route runner, so I still think he'll get drafted relatively high. I would say probably around the 3rd or 4th round for him.
I'll say this for Deshaun. A lot of times in sports you talk about athletes versus an actual football player or like someone who has an understanding of a position. Deshaun Hamilton understands how to play wide receiver better than almost anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And he showed that if you watched any of his film throughout his years at Penn State. It wasn't a fluke that he holds the record for most catches as a Nittany Lion in team history. So
definitely not. And now, Hunter, back to you. Lamar Jackson currently is listed as a quarterback, but depending on what happens at the combine for him, teams may view him as a wide receiver, and some scouts already do. So what do you think he needs to do in order to prove that he can be a quarterback in the NFL, or is he really a wide receiver to you?
If NFL teams are asking Lamar Jackson to play any other position outside quarterback, basically you just need to tell him to kick rocks and have fun playing against him next year. Lamar Jackson, the reason why is he's just an explosive athlete. He's got a great chance to break the 40 time amongst quarterbacks at the combine. He's going to do great in the broad jump and the vertical jump. So it does make sense that you see that explosiveness. You want that in a wide receiver, but Lamar Jackson won a Heisman Trophy as a quarterback. Yes, he can run, but he's a great passer too. And at the combine, he's got a great arm. He's got to show that he can sling the ball down the field. And also just his steady improvement as a pocket passer, being able to read receivers and get the ball right in the perfect place for the receivers to not only catch the ball, but also make a play down the field.
Yeah, I think it's a bit presumptuous to compare him to Michael Vick, which a lot of people have done. Obviously, Lamar Jackson's very talented, but I think it's too early to call him that. We'll see if he is Michael Vick or maybe he's more Terrell Pryor. So only one way to find out.
Yes, we will. That is yet to be seen. But of course, we have one more position to talk about before we wrap up here. We have safety Marcus Allen, a very interesting prospect coming out. Where do you see him getting picked?
I would say Marcus Allen is more kind of more along the lines of Deshaun Hamilton, about a mid-round pick. I would say around 4th or 5th round. Listen, you love the guy. He's a lot of fun to be around. He's got great character, but His strengths aren't so much in coverage. He's just a really good run defender. He's not afraid to hit people. He's fearless. So if he goes to the right scheme, he could be very successful, and I would see him go into around the 4th round.
That'll do it for us at the NFL Combine. Now moving on to DJ Bauer, who is doing bracketology, or as he likes to call it, Bauer-tology.
Welcome back to Penn State Sports Night. I'm DJ Bauer, here with Bauer-tology, my projection of what the NCAA tournament bracket would look like if the season ended today. There's still 2 weeks to go until Selection Sunday, so a lot of things are going to be changing between now and then, but this is what we're looking at right now. So the first region I have here is the South region being played in Atlanta. I have the number 1 overall seed is the Virginia Cavaliers. This is easily one of the best teams in the country. They have the number 1 defense and a great Coach of the Year candidate in Tony Bennett, so I think there's a great chance that Virginia goes a long way in this bracket. Some other notable teams here are Cincinnati. They have the 2nd best defense in the country after Virginia. It'd be very interesting to see if these 2 teams could play in the South region. And of course there's Purdue, another hot pick for a Final Four candidate, maybe winning the Big Ten depending on how the conference tournament goes. Michigan State and Ohio State are contenders for that as well. But I think those are the 3 main contenders here in this region of the bracket. What are the possible upsets? Michigan and New Mexico State could be a possible upset. New Mexico State was a contender for an at-large bid until they lost 2 games in their conference, but they're still a very good team, and I think that's some great potential for a 5-12 upset right there. Now let's go to the next region. The next region I have here is the West region being played out in Los Angeles. Xavier I have right now is the number 1 seed, though they have had a little bit of struggle down the stretch here, especially with that big loss to Villanova. So I think it's a big possibility that they drop off to the 2 line or maybe the 3 line if things get bad. But right now I still have them as number 1. Auburn is a notable team here as well, as they've also been struggling a little bit, just had a bad loss to Florida. If they keep losing, they could find themselves falling as well. Someone that I think could be rising is North Carolina, who have 7 losses, which is a lot for a 3 seed, but the fact that they have a super strong RPI and strength of schedule means that this is one of the best teams in the country. Now looking for upsets again here, we have another 5-12 possibility with Ohio State and Loyola Chicago. Ohio State, of course, is a very good team contending for the Big Ten title, but Loyola Chicago is also a very good team coming from the Missouri Valley Conference. I wouldn't be surprised if this were an upset. Another possibility is Gonzaga-Vermont. Gonzaga is a very good team coming from the West Coast Conference, but Vermont had a huge win streak there of wins in their conference, the America East. I wouldn't be surprised if there was an upset there as well. Now let's go to the next region. Next region I have here is the Midwest, and right now I have Michigan State as the number 1 seed. I think that the selection committee may disagree with me on that one, as in their reveal a couple weeks ago, Michigan State was only a 3 seed, and a lot of the teams that they had seeded higher than them have won out. But I think this Michigan State team is very, very talented. Miles Bridges, of course, is one of the best players in the country. So I think if they keep climbing by the end of the year and maybe win the Big Ten tournament, they will get to that number 1 spot. The 2 seed is Kansas. I think this is a team that could potentially also get up to the 1 line. Looks like they're going to be Big 12 champions again for the 14th year in a row after knocking off Texas Tech. And of course, the 3 seed I have here is Tennessee, another contender from the SEC, maybe trying to fight Auburn to get a higher seed. We'll see how things go in the SEC tournament. So for potential upsets here, once again, I have to point out the 5-12 because Louisiana Lafayette is a very good mid-major team. They could cause some problems in the tournament. And I think we could also look at the winner of this play-in game between Texas and Louisville. Both teams have kind of been struggling lately, but these are also teams that have been known to play well in March, so they could beat Houston. Now let's go to the final region of the bracket that I have here, the East region. And right now I have Villanova as number 1. I know that they just had that bad loss to Creighton in overtime, but I still think this is a very good team, and as long as they keep winning the rest of the way, they will maintain that 1 seed. Duke is another team that could possibly jump up to the 1 line if another team in front of them happens to slip up. They have a huge game coming up against North Carolina at the end of the season, and I think that's going to maybe determine who gets a 2, a 1, or even a 3, depending on how that game goes. And there's Texas Tech, who is looking like they could have been a 2 seed until they had that loss to Kansas. They gave up the Big 12 because of that. But obviously the Red Raiders are still a very good team, and I think that they could cause some havoc in March. As for upsets, I think that Wichita State and Buffalo definitely has potential for that. I think Middle Tennessee and TCU has potential for that. I'm not really sure if we would call that an upset because it's a 7-10 game, but Middle Tennessee is obviously one of the stronger mid-major teams in March, and I think that they could cause some potential havoc here in the bracket, possibly knock off Duke if the bracket were to stay like this. We'll see what happens from here. So now let's look ahead at what games are going to be the biggest heading into Selection Sunday. We still have plenty of games to go, 2 weeks to go. So some of the games that I think are the biggest, one is Duke, North Carolina, which I mentioned. That's a game that gets played at the end of the season every year, one of the greatest rivalries in college basketball. I think whoever wins that game may possibly grab a 1 seed, depending on what the teams ahead of them do. So that's definitely one to look out for. Another one to look out for is Cincinnati and Wichita State. These two teams are also going to be playing at the end of the season to close out the American Conference. And I think that the winner of that game could also get the higher seed, depending on how the American Conference tournament plays out. And as for conference tournaments, there are 2 that I'm keeping my eye on. Purdue and Michigan State are obviously fighting for those top 2 seed lines. If both of those teams can get to the Big Ten Conference Final, I think the winner of that game is going to grab the 1 seed, and the loser probably gets left with a 2 or 3, depending on how the other teams do. And the other one I'm looking at is the Big East between Xavier and Villanova. Villanova has already beaten Xavier this season. They beat him pretty bad the last time that they played him. But Xavier overall has a stronger RPI and a stronger SOS. So I think that if these 2 teams meet again, we may not see the same result, and that one could also impact who's playing the 1st seed and who's playing the 2nd seed. That's all that I have right now for Bauer-tology. Now let's go to Zach Kaplan and Tom Johnson for our closing segment.
Thanks, DJ. And that Bauer-tology, you're going to have to be shaken up again. Virginia Tech knocking off a huge upset win over Duke.
Yeah, without a doubt, that's indeed a big upset.
So what are you looking forward to this weekend, Tom? Talk to me.
Well, I'll tell you, Zach, one thing I'm looking forward to this weekend is Penn State baseball on a spring break road trip out west. You know, they're going to face UC Santa Barbara in Santa Barbara, California, a team that actually went to the College World Series last year in the tournament. That's going to be a challenge to them, but also they're facing Grand Canyon in Phoenix, Arizona, so it's going to be a nice chance to rebound for them after this tough loss that they had last weekend.
We'll see if they can notch a win in either of those series, God willing. And meanwhile, I'm looking ahead to some potential NCAA tournament games in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So if Penn State hockey can have a good showing in the Big Ten tournament, should be enough for at least an at-large bid. Some games in Allentown. Last year they played in Cincinnati, this time a little bit closer to home. So that'd be nice to see. But that'll do it for us here. Be sure to check us out on our YouTube channel, Penn State Sports Night, and our Twitter feed at PSSN TV. For Penn State Sports Night, everybody, I'm Zach Kaplan.
And I'm Tom Johnson. Good night, everybody.